Hi, I'm Erin, the Nature Center's manager for the Detroit Zoological Society, and I'm here outside of the Belle Nature Center, standing in our Habitat Grow Zone. Now, our Habitat Grow Zone is full of butterflies. It is an unmowed area of native and indigenous plants and flowers that are intended to attract pollinators all through the year. And so today we're going to get up close and personal with some of our butterfly and moth species, and I'm going to show you a couple of tools that you can use to identify them in your own backyard and suggest some ways to attract more butterflies to your garden or to your patio. All right, let's take a look. All right, so before we get started with our activities and exploration today, I just wanted to go over a couple of vocabulary words and some of the skills that we'll be working on today with our butterfly lesson. So vocabulary that we have today are larvae and proboscis. And then the skills that we're going to work on, observation is one, comparing and contrasting is another. We're going to work on learning how to identify moths and butterflies, and we're also going to work on classification of moths and butterflies. All right, let's get started. So as we start finding moths and butterflies today, when we're out in the Habitat Grow Zone and on the property here at the Belle Nature Center, I wanted to just review a couple of the similarities and differences so that we can compare and contrast butterflies and moths. So they're all in the same family, and they're the Lepidoptera, which means scaly wing. And that's one of the reasons that we typically use our eyes and not our hands to explore butterflies and moths. We just want to look at them but not touch. Those scales can be very fragile, and their wings can be very delicate. We don't want them to lose those scales and inhibit their flight in any way, shape, or form. So some things to look for when we're trying to decide if we're observing a moth or a butterfly are the antenna. And so the antenna on a butterfly are going to be skinny with a ball or a club typically on the end, and the moth antennae are going to be quite thick and feathery, especially with the male moths. So if you're looking at an insect and you're trying to decide is this a butterfly or a moth, and it's got extremely feathery antennae, that is typically a moth, and it is usually the males. Another thing that we can observe about the differences between butterflies and moths, butterflies are going to fold their wings up above their body vertically, and moths typically hold their wings flat across the tops of their body. Now, these are not rules, these are just guidelines. There are exceptions to both of these. The other thing that is typical about both moths and butterflies is that butterflies typically are day flying and moths are typically night flying, but again, there are exceptions to those rules. So when I'm out and about and I'm looking for moths, I especially like to look for them on the sides of buildings or in grass first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening, when maybe they're just getting settled in for the day or they're just getting ready to come out at night. If you know of a place that leaves the light on overnight, you often find moths attracted to that and on the sides of the building in the morning. So those are some of the things. One other big giveaway that is very common in butterflies is that butterflies tend to be very colorful and heavily patterned. Most moths are not. They're grays and whites and paler colors that they really blend in. But again, there are exceptions to those rules. If you've ever found something like a Luna moth, it's a brilliant green, it's huge. They don't follow any of those rules. So those are just some things that we can think about as we're making our observations. All right, let's go take a look. All right, so we're gonna practice looking at making observations and comparing and contrasting butterflies and moths. And so the first one here is this small orange insect, and we'll notice its wings are held vertically. It is moving them up and down, and it's getting nice and warm. It has long skinny antennae with a club on the end, and it is brightly colored. So this is a butterfly. So now we're going to compare to this moth. And if we look at it, first thing you might notice are those antennae, which are quite feathery and full, very different from the butterfly antennae that we saw in the last butterfly. And it's holding its wings flat across its body, not upright and opening and closing them the way the butterfly was. And then actually we get a great look at its body here. We couldn't see the butterfly's body, but see how round and full this body is? So here is another example. Notice that the wings are held upright. You can really see those long, skinny antennae. There's just a tiny bit of a club on the tips. And this is a butterfly. It's doing an interesting behavior. It is moving its wings back and forth, And scientists aren't completely sure why it does this. It may help to distract a potential predator that would then attack those moving wings instead of the head. All right, this one probably everyone has seen before. They like to nectar on things like clover that grows in our lawn grass. They love, their host plants are in our gardens, things like broccoli and kale. Wings held vertically above the body, long skinny antenna. This is a butterfly, though some tricky things about it are that it has these pale colored wings that maybe remind us of a moth. Okay, so as we consider how to improve habitats in our backyards, even if it's just adding window box planters to encourage butterflies and moths, we need to consider having two different categories of plants available to them. The first is a host plant, where the mother butterfly lays her egg and the caterpillars will grow and eat that plant. And the second category of plants are nectarine plants. And so we're watching the spicebush swallowtail nectar on milkweed. So she's using her long proboscis, you can see it there, which is like a long straw-like tongue, and she's taking nectar out of the milkweed flowers. Now that's a little confusing because milkweed is a really important host plant for monarch butterflies, but the flowers are available for nectaring to any butterfly. And so nectaring plants are often a much broader category, and butterflies are much less specific about which flowers they use for nectaring, which is their adult food source in many cases. And so now we're looking at the common milkweed, which is the host plant of this butterfly. And here is our monarch butterfly. And she is resting right now, not on a host plant and not on a nectar plant. It's pretty windy while I'm making this video, and so you can see she's bouncing around a little bit there. And so this monarch has to lay her eggs on milkweed plants, and those caterpillars grow up consuming that milkweed and getting larger and larger and larger, and it is one of the ways that we can encourage monarchs in our backyards and green spaces is to increase the amount of milkweed available. Here's an egg and a first instar or first hatchling caterpillar from a black swallowtail. And what's cool about this is it's living on dill and other herbs in a little pot in a very small space in my garden. And so you do not need a lot of space to encourage more butterflies. Let's talk about some tools for identification. So the first that we're going to talk about today is Seek, which is a very simple free app. You can download it onto a phone or an iPad. And it's going to utilize the camera function of your phone or iPad to identify things, including moths and butterflies and host plants. So you can see that I've logged in. It knows that I'm here in Belle Isle. Now it's showing me some other species that other people have been seeing lately. And now I'm going to use it to identify the moth we saw earlier. And it's going to give me a little reminder not to trespass while I'm doing my outdoor field exploration, not to eat anything that I find in the wild, and to not harass wildlife. And now it's able to tell me that I found a Virginia tenuta moth, which was a new species in my photography collection here. And if I want, I can find more information, or I can go back to the camera and make some other observations. The second app that I would recommend is iNaturalist. Again, it's free. It's a little more complex. There's a little more to it. It's going to give you a lot of choices when you upload an image like our tenuta moth. But you can also find out a lot more information, and it relies on a community of scientists, of citizen scientists around the world to help you with your identification. So it's a great citizen science project. So now let's go back through the butterflies and moths that made an appearance in our presentation and identify them. So that first orange one is a pearl crescent, a very common butterfly this time of year. Here's a close-up of that moth that we saw already, and we already identified that in our practice as a Virginia tenuta moth. And so it's an interesting one because it is a day-flying moth, at least part of the time, while most moths are night flyers. And this beautiful butterfly rubbing its wings together is a banded hairstreak. And so there are several different hairstreaks that we could find here in Michigan. And this was really helpful to be able to get a close-up photograph and then use Seek to identify it, and then have that identification confirmed in iNaturalist as well. And this is one of our most common backyard butterflies, the Cabbage White. They love to lay their eggs on host plants like kale and broccoli and any of those cruciferous vegetables. You'll also find them in flower gardens. They're just very common. They like to nectar on things like clover and other common lawn plants. Now, some of our most spectacular butterflies in Michigan are the swallowtail butterflies, and this one has obviously been through some things. It's got a pretty ragged swallowtail on it. This was our spice bush swallowtail, which is neat. It's black and blue, and one of the diagnostic features is that it does not have a second set of yellow polka dots the way a black swallowtail would, so this was a neat find. All right, and then one of our more famous butterflies here in Michigan, this is our Monarch. Now look at the lower wing, there is not a big black line going all the way across it, which would tell us that it was a viceroy butterfly, which has the same color pattern, black, orange, and white as the Monarch. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Belle Isle Nature Center as we learned all about butterflies. We want you to stay safe and stay healthy, and we hope to see you back at the Belle Isle Nature Center someday soon.